Welcome back. So, we've gone deep on the Antikythera theorem mechanism, that impossible ancient computer, and we've puzzled over the mysterious Vistus disk. Well, today, we're going to the most remote inhabited place on the entire planet. It's this tiny volcanic island, thousands of miles from anywhere. And on that island, a civilization created something that is completely unique in all of human history, a written language, born in total isolation. But this isn't just about cracking a code. Oh no, this is a story of incredible genius and just devastating loss. This is the story of Rongorongo.
All right, so here's our game plan for this deep dive. First up, we're going to get our heads around why this lost Pacific language is such a huge deal, a total outlier. Then we'll journey to the island and meet the isolated geniuses who created it. From there, brace yourselves, because we have to cover the tragedy, the events that basically silenced it forever. Then we'll join this epic, 150-year-long battle to try and decode it. And finally, we're going to ask the biggest questions of all. Why did they even invent it in the first place? And can we ever get back what was lost?
Just let that sink in for a second. The Pacific Ocean covers a third of our planet, right? It's home to thousands of islands, thousands of sophisticated cultures with these incredible complex oral traditions. And out of all of them, only one, the Rapa Nui, created a writing system from scratch. And then the outside world showed up, just in time to witness and, tragically, to cause its complete and sudden death.
Yeah, let's start right there. Because this isn't like the Festos disc, where we have no idea who wrote it. We know who wrote Rongorongo. Their descendants are alive today on Rapa Nui. But the link, that connection between a people and their ancestral knowledge, has been severed. When we look at these strange, beautiful glyphs, what we're really seeing is the haunting silence of an entire civilization's voice just cut off right in the middle of a sentence.
You know, the settlement of Polynesia is one of the greatest stories of human exploration, ever. These were cultures that developed celestial navigation. They built massive monuments. They had these vibrant societies, and they passed down massive amounts of knowledge through highly trained oral specialists. But the Rapa Nui, they did something different. They invented a technology. They basically created an external hard drive for their entire culture, a way to store incredibly complex information outside of a human brain. In the whole history of Oceania, that achievement is completely and utterly unique.
And what makes this so staggering is where it happened. This wasn't some huge empire with cities and trade routes. Nope, this was born in the most extreme isolation you can imagine. Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, is over 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island and almost 4,000 kilometers from South America. It was a little world all on its own, a perfect laboratory for human ingenuity.
The script itself is just as strange and amazing as its home. These symbols weren't written with ink, they were carved painstakingly with sharpened shark teeth and flakes of volcanic glass into precious wood. Sometimes it was rare driftwood that washed up on shore, other times it was the native Toramiro tree, which is now extinct in the wild. And the way you read it, it's wild. It's called reverse boustrophedon. You read one line from left to right, and then you have to physically flip the entire tablet 180 degrees to read the next line. I mean, can you imagine the mental gymnastics for that alone? The longest text we have, the Santiago staff, is this dense block of over 2,300 glyphs, all made from about 120 basic symbols that combine into thousands of unique signs.
And all of this leads to the central debate, the big question that's been hanging over this whole mystery for more than a century. Is Rongorongo a true writing system? You know, something that actually encodes the specific words and sounds of the Rapa Nui language, something that we could theoretically decipher like hieroglyphs? Or is it a mnemonic device? Basically, a fancy set of symbols to help a priest remember a long chant, where most of the info is actually stored in their head. The difference is everything. One is a puzzle that could be solved. The other is a lock, and the key is gone forever.
The reason we're even forced to have this debate, the reason we're all just guessing, is because of the tragedy at the heart of this story. This knowledge didn't just fade away over time. It was actively, violently, and quickly extinguished. The entire intellectual class of a civilization just wiped out in less than 10 years.
And the end came with terrifying speed. Between 1862 and 1863, Peruvian slave raiders descended on the island. They rounded up about 1,500 people, a third of the entire population. And they didn't just grab anybody. They specifically targeted the leaders. They took the king, his heir, and crucially, they took the Tangata Rongorongo, the scribes, the scholars, the men and women who held the knowledge of the script. After a big international protest, a few dozen survivors were sent back, but they brought something with them, smallpox. The epidemic that followed just ripped through the community. and that was followed by warfare and chaos that destroyed what little was left of their society.
Just look at that number. From a complex society, maybe 15,000 people at its peak, down to 111 survivors in a single generation. It is one of the most complete and devastating demographic collapses ever recorded. It's almost impossible to comprehend. The library wasn't just burned down. All the librarians were taken away and killed.
And right here, this is the tragic punchline. When scholars and missionaries finally showed up and got curious about this unique writing, it was already too late. They showed the carved tablets to the handful of elders who were left, hoping someone could give them a clue. But all they got were confused looks and silence. The last person who knew how to read Rongorongo had died in the slave pits of Peru. The knowledge was gone.
But that silence, that was also a challenge. And it marked the beginning of a whole new chapter in this story, a sprawling, 150-year-long intellectual detective case. It's a battle fought by some brilliant minds against absolutely impossible odds, all of them trying to resurrect this lost voice. Yeah, this fight has been a real drama, played out over more than a century, and it's got a cast of fascinating characters. We're about to meet the first investigator on the scene, the skeptic who said it was a lost cause, the meticulous German who gave us our first real breakthrough, and the modern linguist who claimed he'd solved the whole thing.
So the whole investigation really kicks off with William Thompson in 1886. He gets an elder to try and read from the tablets, but something was off. Every time, the man chanted something completely different. So Thompson made what seemed like a logical leap. The glyphs weren't words, he thought. They were just prompts for stories. He concluded it was a memory aid, not real writing. And that one conclusion, as reasonable as it seemed, cast this huge shadow over the whole field for the next 50 years.
And this next part is a real roller coaster. First, in the 1930s, this influential scholar, Alfred Metro, basically declares the whole mystery dead. He says the knowledge is completely gone, unrecoverable, case closed. Then, after decades of nobody really trying, a German scholar named Thomas Barthel decides everyone gave up too easily. He spent 20 years on this Herculean task, traveling the world, documenting every single artifact. He created the definitive catalog of all the glyphs. We still use it today. And in all that data, he found the first real crack of light, a repeating sequence on one tablet that perfectly matched a known Rapa Nui chant about the lunar calendar. It was the first hard proof that these tablets held specific, structured information. Then you jump forward to 1995. A linguist named Stephen Fisher makes headlines all over the world. He claims he's found a Rosetta Stone structure and has translated a whole creation chant. For a moment, it looked like the code was finally broken. But almost immediately, his fellow linguists universally rejected his work, pointing out what they saw as major flaws. The door slammed shut again. Which brings us right up to today, where the debate has been totally supercharged by a new kind of investigator. Researchers have fed the entire collection of Rongorongo into machine learning algorithms, and the results are, honestly, mind-blowing. The AI, with zero understanding of history or culture, found that the statistical patterns in Rongorongo, how often symbols repeat, how they're structured, are indistinguishable from a real written language. This is a game changer. We can now be almost certain it is a true writing system. We just still can't read a single word.
Okay, so if it really is a true language, that forces us to ask an even deeper question. Let's just forget about what it says for a minute and ask why. Why invent writing here, of all places? What was going on in this tiny, isolated society that made them feel like they needed to create one of the most powerful technologies in human history?
Think about it. Writing isn't invented for poetry. It's born out of necessity. You invent writing to track taxes, to write down laws, to make sure religious rituals are performed exactly the same way every time, or to document the stars so you know when to plant your crops. Writing shows up when a society's information becomes too complex and too important to just trust to human memory. It's a tool for managing complexity.
And that brings us to the leading theory, the one that really seems to connect all the dots. Building on Barthel's lunar calendar discovery, the idea is that Rongorongo was the island's operating manual. On a fragile, isolated island, survival depended on perfect timing. You had to know exactly when to plant, exactly when to fish, exactly when to hold the ceremonies that kept society together. It wasn't just important, it was life and death. The tablets were probably a sacred, highly sophisticated calendar, a guide to keeping their entire world in balance.
That makes the loss feel even deeper, doesn't it? If this was the instruction manual for their whole civilization, what's actually left of it? And where are the surviving pages today?
Well, there are only 26 authenticated Rongorongo artifacts left in the entire world. That is it. And they're not on Rapa Nui. They're scattered in museums and private collections all over the globe, from the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. to the British Museum in London. They are precious, silent pages from a book we can no longer read, held thousands of miles away from the home of the culture that created them.
But there is a glimmer of hope. Just like we saw with the Antikythera mechanism, new technology is starting to peel back the layers of time. Using high-resolution multispectral imaging, researchers can look past all the surface damage and the dark aging of the wood, and they can see things invisible to the naked eye. Faint carvings, corrections, even entirely new glyphs. The work is slow and painstaking, but letter by letter, we are rediscovering this lost alphabet.
And this all leads us to the final, fundamental question that's been underneath this whole story. We've got the artifacts, we've got amazing technology, we have the descendants of the people who wrote it, whose language is almost certainly the key, but was the cultural devastation back in the 1860s so complete, so absolute, that the bridge between these symbols and their meaning has just been destroyed forever?
So at the end of the day, the question comes down to this, and I really want to know what you think. Is Rongorongo a code that, with enough time, enough data, and enough AI power, we will one day crack and finally hear the voices of the ancient Rapa Nui? Or was the knowledge so tied to the lost rituals in the minds of its readers that the unique way of thinking it represents is just lost to history forever? Let me know what you think in the comments. Tomorrow, we're tackling another incredible linguistic mystery, the Minoan script, Linear A. We actually deciphered its descendant, so why can't we crack the original? Join me then to find out.